Hi, Tina Peters here.
See, today they go after you if you're investigating that sort of thing.
Hey, Matt Meck here, filling in. Again, this is Tina's show and Tina's seat with guest hosting for Tina Peters. The Truth Matters, our sister who's still incarcerated. Honor to be asked to be a guest host for her again. She's not only someone who I admire professionally, but she's a personal friend, and we certainly keep her in our prayers every day, from Hawaii to Massachusetts, from Alaska to Texas. We have a guest will be on with us. He's driving right now, so he's trying to get through some technical challenges. He's driving is Pat McSweeney, who is a co-counsel for Tina Peters. And just he pops on just before he does, his background for those who don't know. Ironically, his mom and Bannon's mom were very good friends. So there's a kind of a connection there, small world, I guess you'd call it. And when he was a young buck, a young attorney, he was an attorney for President Nixon, defending him in Watergate, and found out ex post facto the collusion that we see happening today was actually going on against Nixon back then with the prosecutors and the judiciary and the Supreme Court. It was egregious. And when he has time, we can talk about that. But I know his focus right now is constantly making sure that Tina is set free. So he should be joining us here momentarily. And until he does, what I'd like to share is some things that I think it's disrespectful to the heroism that Tina exhibited in exposing the stolen 2020 election. And yes, it was stolen from President Trump. And what you're seeing, just as a sample, we're seeing it in a couple of different states. And sadly, it's the Republican Party. It's the establishment rhino side of the Republican Party. Quick example, in South Carolina, they have a reorg going on, following the precinct strategy. And they did well a couple weekends ago on the precinct level. They get to yesterday, Charleston County, where sadly Rand Paul kind of came in there and did some fundraising with the Charleston GOP chair the night before. So that would have been, I guess, on Saturday. Kind of bashed Trump on the tariffs and so forth, and which was sad to see, I guess, talking to the folks there in South Carolina. But what you're seeing there in South Carolina, what they did, what the establishment rhinos did versus MAGA America First, is they had voice votes instead of individual ballots or individual casting for individual candidates or delegates. And they self-installed the head of the convention by a voice vote, and they had the A's and the nays. The nays actually won out, but he said, "Oh, the A's have it," and they just rammed it down the throats. And then what they did, they went to slates of candidates instead of voting for individual candidates, and the slate of delegates for the state convention instead of voting for individual delegates. And they had it for the primaries and the alternates. And they did this again with voice votes. Blatantly disrespectful, I think, to what Tina did, because there's no paper trail. Not one ballot was cast. And it was all to ram the establishment's agenda down the throat of folks. And it left MAGA, certainly in South Carolina, wounded severely yesterday in Charleston County. And this is not how we're supposed to do this. And this has been fairly unprecedented. They did not see that before in South Carolina. Again, what they did, go to voice votes, no paper trail, no ballots, blatantly call the ayes having it for the establishment when the nays had outwon the voice vote. And then they just moved their agenda right down the list of the day, including these slates of delegates. Is what they're doing what we're seeing in South Carolina, we're seeing it in Montana, we're seeing it in Utah, we're seeing it in Idaho, where they're using slates of candidates and delegates instead of individual votes and individual ballots being cast for votes for candidates and delegates. And this is not transparent. It's not verifiable, but they're just exerting their will. So, I shared this with a couple of people, certainly in our coalition. I shared it with Steve Bannon, Frank Gaffney, Brian Kennedy, General Flynn, Laura Logan, and others on this is the tactic that they're using. And this is what we need to be aware of in other states because it's working there, it's working in others. And we're seeing it as a pattern now going across the country. So we have to be aware of that. One, having slates available, having alternates available for slates of candidates, if that's what the power structure is going to be pushing. And I would say, secondly, what can you do? Do you walk out and not allow a quorum to be there? Because certainly in Charleston yesterday, MAGA, America First, had a preponderance of the members. Probably could have walked out, prevented a quorum, although maybe they would have said with a voice vote they had a quorum. Do motion after motion after motion to not allow voice votes, motion after motion after motion not to have slates of candidates, motion after motion to dismiss. The Rhino establishment has adapted. They saw the precinct strategy. They saw this as a way, maybe a way to counter the precinct strategy. And now we need to be able to counter their counter. It's a constantly evolving process. I know I'm going to be talking to Boone Cutler later today to maybe have some discussions on the narrative and the counters that we can do to prevent this from being effective going forward. Hawaii is doing the same thing, I'm told. And our Mark Cook, who the audience knows very well, he is currently in Hawaii. He was just on Oahu. They're on the Big Island today of Hawaii. He'll be going then to Maui and then to Kauai, and having great success talking to grassroots, talking to leaders, and interestingly, talking to some Democrat state reps who are listening. And they want to understand more about the election ecosystem. And they're actually even talking with him about having a hand count prototype demo in Maui County. So more to come on that. And I'm sure Mark will be on this show either as a guest or filling in as a host. He can perhaps explain and explore more with this as we go forward. But I wanted to let folks know what's going on there in South Carolina and other states. And before we rail on the Democrats, those of us who are Republicans, we need to get the log out of our own eye before we take the twig out of the other folks' eye, because we're egregiously not following transparent and verifiable procedures. Second thing, just wanted to let the audience aware of, something that you're seeing the Secretary of State of Nevada do and others, is this vote by phone push. We got to meet people where they are. We got to get to our rural population and vote by phone. We go to vote by phone, it's over. How do you have verifiability, transparency on that? But that is the next move that I'm looking at, that we're seeing, is that pushing. Yeah, okay, the machine's got some issues. Let's bypass the machines and we'll just go to this. That cannot be, and that's why I think President Trump's, and I think it's an affront to what Tina stood up for, what she is sacrificed for, what she's in prison for right now. No longer in jail, she's now in prison, in state prison. These are the things that are sadly disrespectful to the sacrifice Tina has made. But watching your states, your locales, for this push for vote by phone. And that has got to be challenged at every level. And then finally, and if we can't get Pat on the dialing in here, I'll call him and we can work it that way. I'll just have him on my phone and we can ask him questions, or I can talk to him that way so you can all hear. But the great Steve Stern, 24 April is his next election integrity call. And then the 25th of April, following on what Apollo and Joe and Mark Cook and others did on the Let My Tina Go day. Steve's been talking to Joe Hoft, looking at, I think, the 25th of April for something, again, very similar. We have a bunch of the podcasters. You have guests like Professor Clements, Doug Gould, Clay Parikh, Sean Smith, Professor Frank, and others talking about Tina, talking about her as a person, talking about the process and the procedures that she was doing and upholding her duties as both a state rep for elections with Colorado law, which I think is 25 months for preservation, federal law, 22 months. So that again is going to be looks like the 25th of April. Steve Stern is heading that up. I know Mark Cook has offered to help him best he can. And as fate would have it, it looks like Mark Cook will be in Mesa County during that period of time with a group of folks that are supporting Tina. So those are some of the things that are happening in support of Tina, like this event that Steve Stern is going to do, but also what the own Republican Party is doing against MAGA America First to thwart that. So these are the things I think we need to be aware of, and that it's not just a general election. It's not just the primary election. So bona fide elections for state, local, federal offices. It's what's happening in party reorgs, what they are attempting to do, the establishment in party reorgs, and what they targeted. In talking to the folks in South Carolina, what they were targeting was folks who believed 2020 was stolen, and folks who do not want the machines, who want to actually follow what President Trump said in his initial executive order, going to hand count, paper ballots, voter ID, U.S. citizens, count more cast, precinct level. And I think you're going to see more of those. Hey, Patrick, can you hear us? Hey, sir. Thank you. What I was doing, I kind of gave your background to the folks again, so they know your illustrious history in the legal field. Not only did you, as a young man, work for Nixon, but the DOJ, and now you're co-counsel with Tina Peters. And I explained a couple of things that are occurring. One is Steve Stern, Joe Hoft, and he were talking, Patrick, and if no movement occurs between now and the end of the month, they're looking at a 25 April, another kind of like a free Tina Day, but having all the podcasters talk, having folks like Mark Cook, Professor Clements, Sean Smith, all talk about Tina herself as a person and what she lawfully did in Mesa County. So if I could, with you, if you could maybe give folks an update. I know previously on the show prior to this, they were talking about the AG's response, Colorado AG's response to the U.S. government's expressing an interest in this thing and trying to shut it down. What is your take on that? And what is the I guess the update on what's happening now, what's going to happen?
Well, there's a hearing on the 20th. The Attorney General, Colorado Attorney General, opposed actually asked for exclusion of the statement of interest by the United States, saying they had no interest. I thought it was a frivolous offering on their part. There are two reasons, and we filed a brief with the court saying they have two very clear interests. One is the First Amendment is not just a personal right. It is a fundamental privilege that makes this country what it is. It's a broader right than a personal or an individual right. And the United States enforces the First Amendment for the protection of everybody, guarantee freedom of speech. The second point is that the United States has a government in this very unusual arrangement in this country where we split sovereignty between the states and the federal government. But under the Constitution, the federal Constitution and federal statutes are supreme, and no judge can fail to honor federal constitutional requirements and statutory requirements. Well, that's exactly what happened here. Congress enacted a law that made every election official responsible, imposed a duty to preserve all election records. The Secretary of State in Colorado ordered that those records be deleted. Now, there's an argument which has little weight as far as I'm concerned, that she had ordered the preservation of election project records, which do not include the things that would show that an election was tampered with. Never mind the fact that the statute says you cannot destroy any records related to the 2020 election. And that's what Tina did. This case should have been thrown out before it began, because under the Supremacy Clause, no state can prosecute or punish any individual for complying with a federal statutory duty. That's where it should have ended. But the court dismissed that argument right at the beginning of the trial. Actually, it was even long before the trial began. Tina should never have been forced to stand trial in Colorado because she was exercising a federal statutory duty that was specifically imposed on her as an election official.
You know, Pat, I was talking to folks last several days about that. I know many people are frustrated, right? The rank and file, the folks who know Tina, love Tina, folks who don't even know her personally, but just think she's a hero for helping us to understand. And I've heard several people. We were briefed by somebody was on the show that you were on with us, myself, and Warren. A gentleman was on there, and I've heard Patrick Byrne say this and others, that what Tina was able to do through her actions was give them the Rosetta Stone to understand what was going on. And they've seen this in other locales across the country. What do you think is likely to happen in this hearing? Do you think the judge is going to entertain? Do you think this motion will be observed by the judge, or is he just going to not allow this motion to dismiss to occur?
Well, we're not on the motion to the motion to exclude the statement of interest.
I got you.
It's the only focus, to exclude the United States from this process, or at least to exclude the part in which the United States said they were going to launch a criminal investigation of Tina's persecution. That obviously offended the Colorado Attorney General, who was a part of that process. The local prosecutor, the Attorney General of the United States under the Biden administration, the Colorado Attorney General, all involved in deciding to prosecute Tina. They never went after Griswold for ordering the destruction of election records. Never considered it. And when this is said and done, it will cast a blame on both the United States Department of Justice, the FBI, the state attorney general, and the local prosecutor.
I was going to ask you, listening to that motion by the AG, there, I guess to kind of quote a little bit of Shakespeare, it sounds like he doth protest too much. Perhaps they're a little worried.
Well, that investigation is going to go forward regardless of what this judge does in this case, in Tina's case. In fact, all of the details of the investigation will not be brought out before we get a decision on whether Tina should be released. That's really going to be independent of this habeas corpus application. But she should be released because the reason for sentencing her and the reason for denying her bond pending appeal was because of what she said, which was protected under the First Amendment. And there's absolutely no justification for what the judge did and what the Court of Appeals did in denying her bond based on her speech, on her First Amendment protected speech. It's unheard of.
Yeah, it is. I've with Apollo and Joe and Mark, when they had the Let My Tina Gode, they played that judge's words in a sentencing hearing. Oh my God! I mean, I've never, the judge to me, not a lawyer, but the judge to me, Pat, seemed more like the prosecutor than supposedly a disinterested party as a judge.
The irony is he refused to allow what she said and what she found and the statute on which she was acting in her trial. And yet he used what she said as the basis for sentencing her. She said, you're a charlatan. You lied. You've endangered the community by undermining our democracy. In other words, we cannot raise legitimate questions about the conduct of an election. Simply can't question them. That's contrary to any democratic notion. We have free speech and right to analyze, question, evaluate actions of the government. And what he's saying is, no, when you do that, you're a danger to the community. This is absolutely absurd.
And I would want robust discussion. I mean, when we were sometimes referred to as election deniers, it's like, wait, hey, I give credit to the Democrats, 2000 to, I don't know, 2019, before they had this metamorphosis. You saw something not right, and you were speaking up. For whatever reason, you were speaking up, and now all of a sudden you got amnesia. But as I was talking before you came on, Mark Cook is over in Hawaii right now, and they were just on Oahu, on the Big Island today, going to Maui, then Kauai, and given a presentation on the election ecosystem, and looking at having a hand count demo. And Pat, state reps who are Democrats are actually interested, right? You got average everyday people. When I say it's not so much R versus D, it's we the people versus those who want to control we the people.
If anyone spent the time to read the 3 expert reports that Tina commissioned after she found the records and she had images of what the server showed, they would be astonished. It was refuted, to use a loose term, refuted by the local district attorney who had no background in forensics, no background in cyber matters at all. And he was up against one of the originals in cyber, and not just law, a man who's been teaching this at Texas A&M forever. He's one of the originals in this field. His report alone, you don't have to read all, his report alone shows exactly what happened. That report and nothing associated with it was allowed by the judge. None of that came in.
It baffles one's mind, Pat. It's like I forget the judge's last name, but up there in over there in New York, where he just decided himself to value Mar-a-Lago at $18 million. I mean, anybody been to Mar-a-Lago? Hell, vacant land over there is $18 million.
There's some land just sold for $200 million in Palm Beach. $200 million, about an acre, I think. May have been 2 acres, but
I know there's a lot going on. We've been getting some best and brightest minds getting together to maybe put some ideas out on what could be follow-on EOs, for what President Trump just launched. But and I want to go to you because you're the source. You're closest to her, and you're like reason day a trial right now. The reason your fiber or your being is get her out. Everything else will work out later. Get her the hell out. Woman doesn't even have a traffic ticket. Gold Star mother, for God's sakes. Folks are saying, we know why they're wrong on this one, but why doesn't Trump pardon her? Or why doesn't Trump just call Polis? Or why don't the U.S. Marshals just go pull her out and put her in the witness protection program? If you could, based on your background in DOJ, and I think at one point you said 50 years ago you were involved in the witness protection program, why is that not courses of action that would be ultimately to the benefit of Tina?
Well, I'm not at liberty to talk about details in that regard, but I think the president is doing all he can right now. I don't know what leverage he's got with Governor Polis. The candidates for statewide office next year in Colorado are using the name Trump as their way of assuring their nomination because his name is toxic in Colorado. I have a son who's been there for 30 years, and the state has changed. We hope after we filed the application for a pardon, Governor Polis will look at it seriously. But it would be against all the political headwinds for him to do so. But I'm not putting it past him. I think he's got some measure of character, and she doesn't belong in jail. No one who looks at this could justify a non-violent defendant who was convicted in this kind of trial, where nothing that she offered in the way of defense was allowed. She was not allowed to defend herself, not allowed to even show the statute that required her to do what she did.
How does that happen? I mean, probably the person who's going to watch her show here and others in America, they're like, well, this is America. How does that happen?
I scratch my head, Matt. I have, in 57 years, I've never seen a case like this. It's the most outrageous handling of a straightforward matter that should have allowed her to defend herself. No jury would have convicted her, in my opinion, had she been able to produce for them to hear what she was required to do and what she actually did.
What if I could, for the average folks to understand the legal, I guess, machinations, what was their reasoning behind not allowing Tina to put on a robust defense like that?
They didn't want the evidence that she discovered as a result of getting that image from the server. They didn't want that out. This has been a concerted effort, including Merrick Garland and the FBI, as well as the state attorney general and the local prosecutor.
Because wasn't it initially the FBI who raided her home?
Yes, and it took Mike Lindell's phone, held him for an hour in a drive-through at a fast food place in rural Minnesota, took his phone, never returned it, based upon three statutes that don't apply here. That's one of the things I want the Justice Department to look at. How could any lawyer have made the argument they did for the warrants that were used against Tina and her friends in Colorado and against Mike Lindell in Minnesota? It's outrageous.
Pat, I think the same methodology was used to take Mike McDonald. He's the NVGOP chair's phone. He's a former cop, with Las Vegas Metro. And if memory serves, I still don't think he's got his phone back either.
They could not justify their position, and they were criticized by the Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals in St. Paul a year or so ago, when I argued the case there. They had no intention of giving the electronic devices back. They seized everything they could get their hands on in those raids. Not just Mike's, but Tina's and her friends.
And I think they took Congressman Perry's phone too and he's a retired one-star general.
Doesn't matter. What we went through under the Garland administration of justice was absolutely unforgivable. It tarnished the reputation of the department. But
how does it get it back, Mike? I was listening to Bannon's show this morning, and he had Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch.
Yeah.
And Tom said, hey, I love Pam, I love Cash, but the DOJ can't investigate it. They're talking about, I guess, Stevens or something being elevated to run the D.C. office for the FBI. And like this guy, from what we can see, was violently going after J6 protesters and so forth. How the hell is you allowing him to be the head of the FBI field office? And Fitton said something I thought was interesting. He goes, who's investigating the crimes against Trump that Trump endured in New York? And he goes, and he thought, and maybe your background can add some to this, is that Trump should appoint a special prosecutor, I guess, or counsel, and have it run out of the White House to look into what DOJ did back then, not having DOJ look at itself. Is that even make sense to you?
Well, I'm in an awkward spot, Matt, because I filed a brief in Florida in the prosecution of President Trump, arguing that the appointment of the special counsel was illegal because there was no office of special counsel. I'm not sure the president has that authority. What we should have is a bipartisan congressional investigation. Shame the Democrats into looking at exactly what happened at Justice. See if they could justify what happened under Obama and Biden in the corruption of the Department of Justice. We go back to Lois Lerner, the treatment.
IRS lady. Yeah.
It's simply impossible for me to believe that lawyers didn't come out of the woodwork complaining about it. But I've lost confidence in the bar. Lawyers have stood by and let this happen without an outcry. They shouldn't, even in the Obama years, what Eric Holder was doing was outrageous.
It was. Now, I was going to say, though,
Navarro and Bannon did, but he defied Congress, but nobody put him in jail.
No, I know. You mean Holder, right?
Yeah, Eric Holder just thumbed his nose at the court.
And remember, the only time, and I can't figure this out, the only time that Obama ever exerted executive privilege in 8 years was over Fast and Furious. I know why that was.
Yep.
Intimately involved with that information. I spent hours talking to Senate Judiciary, House Oversight on exact things. Great people. I mean, as I told President Trump's folks, I know the Terry family, Josephine Terry, the mom, Brian Terry, who was her murdered son, the two sisters, Michelle and Kelly and Kent. I just want answers. And Trump knew in detail in 2016, and he promised to get to the bottom of it. And he told, this is interesting, Pat. He told the mom and the two sisters, so Josie, Kelly, and Michelle, August 2019, I believe, he brings them in the Oval Office after an event in the East Room honoring ICE and CBP. This was when first term. And he tells Josephine Terry, there's an investigation going on regarding Fast and Furious. I'm on top of it, and it's much bigger than the American people could ever know. I think he was seeing this as I talked to Jason Foster and others in testimony to them, talking to them hours on the phone. It's like in this, I think the election is one other aspect of this, probably maybe the root cause of all of it. It's like a many-tentacled hydra, and that was just one arm, and he seemed to be very familiar with what was going on in that first term, and it's manifesting now.
I do have to reflect on what I experienced in my years at Justice when Democrats and Republicans worked together on the Hill. You mentioned the Witness Protection Program. Scoop Jackson was chairman of the Senate Investigative Committee, and he ordered me up to justify how we had handled the Witness Protection Program. Well, it wasn't until I got that command to show up that I looked into it. We were issuing consecutive Social Security numbers for an entire family, which made it very easy for the mob to find them. But we worked, there was no public display of the ineptitude of the department at that time. We couldn't explain. He wanted to solve the problem, not make a political point. If we could have the same sort of thing we had with the Church Commission,
yes,
we ought to look into what it takes to right that ship of justice. So we have confidence in the criminal division, the FBI, the department as a whole. We don't have it now. The public, it's not just the Ruby Ridges, it's the treatment of people like Tina and her friends who were raided, almost day-long raids. It was all done not just to get evidence, but to punish them, intimidate. And that's what the program has been under Merrick Garland. We're going to intimidate people, call them domestic terrorists for saying that there may have been problems in the 2020 election.
Well, then they should go. Then every time there was an issue back in 1980 or 1984, I mean, this is America, right? One of the things we Americans do pretty well is bitch. We like to bitch, and it's protected. We can do that. You can voice your mind.
That's the point that JD made in his Munich speech. We assume that everybody understands the preciousness of our free speech protection here. They don't have that in Europe.
Oh.
And I think they've got to carefully analyze which direction they want to take. But he was absolutely right. And if we don't protect ours against these people who believe that the First Amendment is an obstacle, not just John Kerry, but there are a number of Democrats who openly defying all of our history and our jurisprudence, protecting free speech. We don't want free speech, they're saying. It's dangerous. It's dangerous not to have it. That's the problem.
Well, it's interesting. You say that. Mike Benz, I like listening to, he got a theory that free speech is okay as long as the institutions are saying it, but we don't want the people to say it because we don't want the populism. We want freedom of speech, democracy, if you will. And we don't have a democracy, we have a republic, but he said it's shifted to the institutions as opposed to the people.
Well, it's obvious that when the Biden administration came in January of 2021, there was a deliberate, concerted effort to make sure that it was not a popular uprising as it was in 2008 with the Tea Party. The Tea Party movement scared the devil out of them. They didn't want this concern about the way the elections were handled to get out of control. And very early on, in the late winter of 2021, they declared anybody who challenged the election as to be a domestic terrorist. That's how far it went. I couldn't get anyone to write about it. Yeah, this is exactly what Vance was complaining about in Munich. Look around the country, around the world, for that matter. People are being prosecuted if they happen to be a viable candidate against the regime. It's happening.
Bolsonaro, right? Le Pen. They're trying to do some stuff in Hungary, Romania. But did you see? I just watching this I don't know if it was over the weekend. Millions of people came into the streets in Brazil for Bolsonaro. Millions came in the streets for Le Pen. I don't think the institutions are going to be able to keep this tramp down. And if they try, God forbid, we'll have the French Revolution style instead of the U.S. Revolution style. I fear.
Well, we've got to address that problem in Latin America. The Brazilian election had questionable votes in the amount of 5 million.
Yep.
What happened in Venezuela, fortunately, was cataloged by the opposition. Didn't matter there because the autocratic control they have frustrated the obvious wishes of overwhelming majority of Venezuelans. And it's
because, as you know, Cuban intelligence runs Venezuela.
To continue.
I mean, Cuban intelligence runs Venezuela. Maduro doesn't run it. Cubans run it. It's. I mean, you see these glimmers of hope, but it's frustration. And know if you could one or two things to tell average everyday folks, and again, the 25th of April, I guess if there's no substantive movement, certainly Steve Stern wants to have like a Let My Tina Go Day Part 2. What could folks do? I mean, if folks want to call the governor or email the governor, what would you recommend as a result-producing activity that's to the benefit of Tina?
And I think the public voice can still be heard. And maybe the best thing is for them to contact their member of Congress, their senator. Certainly, Steve and others can put together a package, talking points. But anyone who looks at this 70-year-old woman who's being persecuted, it was not even a question of a violent crime or any danger to the community. She is, picture your own family, a 70-year-old in your own family being in prison under these conditions. It has to outrage everybody. You just don't treat people in this country that way.
But it had its effect, you know. I mean, we went around the country. We would talk to election officials, city officials, county officials. They were afraid of being Tina Petered, Pat. It put the fear of God in them.
Well, that's what both the Secretary of State and the district attorney said. They wanted to send a message. They wanted every election official to be afraid, not to do what she did. They trumpeted the fact this was the only successful prosecution. Well, it's a good reason for that. No honest prosecution would ever succeed under these circumstances. But they did this for political reasons, to suppress that very message.
reminds people more of a Soviet or CCP show trial than, as you said, rigorous American jurisprudence. And I know I've talked with you, and irrespective of someone's politics, you want somebody to have their constitutional rights. Period. End of sentence.
Even under Colorado law, there's a statute that gives you a defense based upon the execution of a public duty. Now, if that doesn't fit this case, what does? She was not allowed to use that defense. It was excluded. The judge ruled she could not assert a defense established by the Colorado legislature that would vindicate her for executing a statutory duty.
Pat, it's interesting. Look what they just did in Colorado. As you said, it's changed a lot. This thing where if you don't, affirm your child's desire for gender affirming care, they rammed it through their house without any votes, no amendments, nothing. They just used some arcane rule. And sadly, before you got on the show, we got about 10 minutes left. I'm watching establishment rhino. I call them the uniparty. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you get high up there, you're two sides of the same coin, not a dime's worth of difference between either one of them. Is that they in South Carolina? This was yesterday in Charleston County. The temporary head of the convention there in Charleston, South Carolina, this is talking to the South Carolina teams who were there, had a voice vote where he actually lost the voice vote, but he's out, the ayes have it, and just moved forward, made himself the president of the convention. Instead of individual candidates or delegates, they just had slates, and they voted for the slates. Again, voice vote. Not one damn ballot was ever cast. It was all via voice votes, which were egregiously wrong. People came out of that meeting, MAGA America First, dejected and said, oh my God, this would have been an event that Kim Jong-un would have been embarrassed by how rigged it was. But this is what the Republican leadership is doing. It's a dishonor to what Tina sacrificed for, when not even in elections, but in party reorgs, they're not allowing the people's voice to be heard.
I could go on and on, Matt, with not just the hypocrisy, the dual standard in Colorado, supported by the dual standard coming out of the Department of Justice under Merrick Garland. For example, in her trial, the prosecution used the fact that there was a release of passwords. Tina, they didn't attribute it to Tina, but this is what started the investigation in motion, which was their justification for pointing to these passwords that were put up live on the web. They were partial passwords. They were useless. They were useless. Meanwhile, the Secretary of State posted the same kind of passwords and was never punished. Never punished. She herself did it. In the sentencing and in the opposition to her motion for bond pending appeal, she was they used a conviction of contempt. She was in the courtroom during a hearing on one of the co-defendants, and the prosecutor said she is taping this hearing and told the judge. So they called Tina up, and she denied taping it, and he punished her for contempt and seized her iPad. That iPad was later examined by a forensic expert, never been recorded, never been deleted, proof positive that the prosecutor falsely accused her. In a deposition under oath, he had to admit he didn't know whether she was taping or not. But he used that. Fortunately, the Court of Appeals threw that conviction out, the Colorado Court of Appeals. This is the kind of double standard you have in Colorado. This is the kind of thing that was used to justify 9 years of sentence.
It's mind-blowing. And I guess as we get here to the end, about 5 or 6 minutes left, is to kind of separate Tina for a second and looking at what the DOJ criminally is looking at, not just what they did to Tina, but perhaps what the people of Colorado suffered from with what these folks in power did. Do you think, I won't say that because I know you probably can't say certain things, but that investigation, could that lead to charges against folks in Colorado for what they've done in the elections, violating election laws?
I would press until that happens to see that people are held accountable, including the Secretary of State, who's now running for Attorney General of Colorado.
Because I would think what's good for the goose is good for the what's good. Yeah, what's good for the goose is good for the gander here, right?
Absolutely. Now we're going to find out an awful lot about how the Merrick Garland role was played out in Colorado. We're going to find out exactly what happened between the Attorney General's office and the local DA, and how this unfolded. He was, in fact, someone from the local prosecutor's office participated in the FBI raid of Tina and others. Some of it was they destroyed property, intimidated family members. That's par for the course under Merrick Garland. We're going to get into that, though, and I hope the Justice Department will pursue that until they get to the bitter end and people are brought to account for what happened. Because if they're not, it's going to happen again.
And I know folks want to help Tina, and a lot of folks. There's a lot of passion, and again, I just as we close out, your last words of wisdom, so we don't run off it with passion, but not like a focus that is advantageous to the end result we all want in getting Tina out immediately. Your recommendations are for folks to contact their senators or representatives, those kind of things?
I think so, because that is the most likely avenue to produce results. We could do what the left does and go out on the street and intimidate people. I think the good people, even Democrats, can be shamed into doing the right thing. And if this isn't the right thing to do, to exonerate Tina and dig into what's been happening, state, local, and federal levels of law enforcement have been corrupted, and that needs to be changed.
I would say most folks, Pat, and then we'll close it out here. It's like, oh my God! I mean, it seems that any objective person could say, let's just not even rule on the eventual appeal. But for God's sakes, based on her exemplary history, Gold Star mom, everything else, let the woman out on bond pending appeal. That seems like a no-brainer to most people.
I hope that's the case, Matt. And I think most people of goodwill are going to see it that way. We just need to, and I think the most effective way to lift their voices, you can write to the White House and to Justice, but I think writing to your member of Congress, particularly a member of the House, where they're more immediately connected with the people back home, that's going to reverberate. I think it'll work.
I think so too. And something, I had recommended to Steve Bannon. I said, hey, sir, if you get a chance, Brian Glenn and those folks who are Rav White House journalists now, can they ask Trump maybe just to, based on the DOJ's interest, what is your thoughts on what's going on with Tina Peters? Just to keep it in the national conscience. I think that would be prudent.
Yeah, what he said in her defense has had a powerful impact. Obviously brought the Justice Department into this case. I don't think the judge is going to throw them out. They've made a statement of interest and they're entitled to be heard. Now, I think that's very powerful, but I do think this needs to be broadened. Let the politicians know they're going to be held to account too. This is a national policy.
Yes. Well, Pat, I know, thank you. As we wrap up here, I know a conversation I've had with you, your focus is Tina, right? Getting her
Absolutely.
out. That seems to drive you every dang day.
Absolutely.
Pat, thank you, sir. I'll let you get back to help working on Tina's case and others I know. But thank you so much, because getting it from you helps the audience to know what's really the ground truth, what's happening here.
Or she's still bearing up. She's in intake at the state correctional facility, but pray for her.
Pat, we will. We pray for her every day, and pray for her legal team to have the wisdom of Solomon in your defense of her.
Well, thanks for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Pat, thank you so much. Take care, sir. Well, folks, and what we'll do certainly is keep any updates going. As he indicated, she's in intake, which kind of puts her in a blackout, from what I understand, for a while until she's put out there. I and others let Pat know that there were some potential concerns of threats to her safety in that facility that she's going to be at. So we had made that known to Patrick so he could bring that to the attention of authorities there to make sure that they keep her protected and eyes on her. And I would humbly suggest, folks, as he said, contact your rep, your senators. I would get on Truth Social, email the governor respectfully, message the governor, message Trump, and just ask. Make your voice heard in a respectful way. You don't fight evil with evil. You overcome evil with righteousness. But righteousness can be badass, and we who know the righteousness in Tina's heart and what she did, we can do this. And there's the governor's office there. Apollo's put up on the screen. Again, respectfully, contact them. Explain at a minimum why can't Tina be out on bond pending appeal with no history of anything, and a Gold Star mom, for God's sakes, and what she endured. I mean, when they originally arrested her, when she was in the jail there, her dad died. Then they engage in God knows whatever to have her husband, who was in Arkansas assisted living care, having dementia, to sign a divorce decree. Said he thinks he did something bad. How the hell that was even legal, I don't know. But what the apparatus did to Tina as an example to shut everyone else up is reprehensible, and it's not America. And I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, you got to speak up for this. This can't happen to anybody. I mean, if this were a Democrat clerk in Mesa that was doing it and the tides were turned, I'd say everybody in this audience would still uphold the fact that you're trying to do your duty. You're trying to do the right thing. And that's, in the end, that's the final analysis, right? Is it right? Are you doing what's right? And we've talked to Tina, and every once in a while she's able to join our Friday calls that we have. She says, she wishes she wasn't there, but she wouldn't recant anything. She can sleep well at night because she knew what she did was right and was the right thing to do. So, I asked the folks in Colorado, can you sleep well at night? Knowing what you did, not just what you're going to face in this world, but what you're going to face when we all leave this earth suit. What answers are you going to have to that? How can you possibly defend yourself to that? I can't discern how folks can think that this was the right thing to do. Again, at a minimum, out on bond pending appeal. The governor maybe comment on President Trump's Truth Social. Again, sir, what are your thoughts about Tina Peters? And I'll ask everybody who can, contact RAV, OAN, Newsmax, and when they've got the reporters there in the White House, ask them to ask a question. Hey, President Trump, with the DOJ's interest in your interest in Tina Peters, what is the update? What do you think is going on? What do you hope goes on regarding Tina Peters? We need to keep her in the national consciousness, because I tell you, more and more folks are seeing through this veil of crap that's being foisted upon us. So please do that. And I want to close out for, if I could, for a quick. It's a simple prayer. It's simple. It's a little long, but I just want to read it real quickly. in the time we've got, and it's for Tina, it's for everyone in this audience, and it's Psalm 91, 1-16. I'll read it real quickly here. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In him will I trust. Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings thou shalt trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold and see the reward of the wicked, because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet. Because he has set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. Every day, I certainly say that. I know many others say that. For Tina, for folks who are supporting Tina, for folks like Untamed Media, and Mark Cook and Doug Frank and Professor Clements, Sean Smith, Clay Parikh. The list goes on and on of folks who just simply want to get back to a transparent and verifiable election. And that's all we want. It's so simple, it's hard. And you got to ask yourself, who wants to stop that? And you get to the answer pretty quickly. You want to stop it as folks who are benefiting from that power. So again, I want to thank Untamed Media here for allowing me to guest host for Tina Peters. This is her seat. We keep it warm for her. We love her. She's going to be out. We know God is going to deliver our sister. And when she does, hopefully, I know 31 May, there's going to be an event in Dallas showing kind of a hand count round robin. It's going to be in Glenn Beck Studios. We got some great folks putting that on, trying to do something similar in Florida in June, and in Las Vegas on 5 July at the 8 Hearn Hotel. Election process briefing, hand count demonstration, Secretary of State of Wyoming trying to get Secretary of State of Missouri, Joey Gilbert, talking about announcing his run for election, Secretary of State here for elections. We are going to make a difference, and always Tina is going to be invited if she's out. God bless you. We love you. Tina, can't wait till you take this seat again. Take care.
Hi, Tina Peters here.
See, today they go after you if you're investigating that sort of thing.